Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. In today's program, we are going to take up for discussion a significant milestone achieved on the economic front. Pakistan's stock exchanges reaching a psychological barrier of 100,000 points today. The index closed at 1,82.77 points, up by 813.52 points from the last close. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has congratulated the nation regarding this particular milestone, saying this remarkable achievement reflects the trust of business community and investors in the government policies, and the government's economic team and officials working tirelessly to promote investment in the country deserve appreciation. Also, while speaking at the National Security Workshop, the Prime Minister said national security has direct linkage with the economic security. The Prime Minister also talked about the IMF program and said that to make it the last program of the country, we have to have a comprehensive plan in that regard. And the government will soon unveil the homegrown plan, which will transform Pakistan's economic landscape. Not only this, but also the Ministry of Finance in its monthly inflation outlook says, let me quote, Pakistan's economic performance during the current fiscal year remained better than expectations, and inflation is expected to further recede to around 6% in November. In today's show, these all important aspects of a discussion. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Abdul Jaleel. He is senior economist. Mr. Jaleel, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Mr. Farhan Bokhari. He is senior journalist. Mr. Bokhari, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. On the phone line, we'll be joined by another participant. As they join in, I'll be introducing them. Let me begin the discussion with you, Mr. Jaleel. Reaching the psychological barrier of over 100,000 points. This particular term, when it is used, what is it indicative of? The psychological barrier and the 100,000 points at Pakistan Stock Exchange.
Although the stock exchange performance is not only a physical criteria of judging the investment scenario of the country, but it also contributes towards raising the bullish sentiment in the market as well, and the psychological impact upon the investor, upon the business community, small or the big, is very helpful in bringing more optimism in your policies. And it brings a lot of faith in your investment policy, in the budgetary policy, and the priority that the government of Pakistan attaches. Specifically, I would say nowadays towards the export, to the reduction of the the government expenditure, especially the current expenditure, and also sparing money for development of the asset in the country on a long-term basis. And these assets, both intangible and the tangible assets. But here I would like to say that investment policy, it depends a lot. I think government have taken some rational step to create a rational relationship between the monetary policy, between the taxation policy and investment policies, and that is now paying the cost. So there was a certain imbalances previously, and those imbalances over the period of the time and upon the complaint and upon the suggestion of the business community, they have been removed.
So could you elaborate a little in detail regarding this particular investment policy, bringing in that balance, the points that you have already mentioned?
There are many factors. Number one, the policy factor. On theoretical basis, you can say whatever the government. Number two is the practical scenario, the practical environment, whether it's a stable economically, investment-friendly environment is available or not. And thirdly, which is most important aspect of important aspect with any investor that they would like to see is whether his investment is secure, right, and his and the services can be rendered. The service can be rendered through a what window say the efficient through a one window operation, which guarantees the efficiency, which at least helps you in achieving the objective of investment through through without much involving yourself in a complicated governance structure or the complicated procedures which normally have been impeding investment in our country. I think the government have taken some good step in this respect.
When you talk of one window operation, overcoming all those barriers or hurdles, so do we understand that this particular giant initiative on the part of the government of Special Investment Facilitation Council actually helped in that particular direction considerably to a greater extent?
Certainly, this council has given, the council appears to be quite determined in its policy, and they have earned the interest of the investor as well. Since they are now, the delay has been, the causes of the delay have been overcome. Initially, there was, as we all know, the governance structure is very complicated. The bureaucratic requirements are so lengthy that sometimes they hinder the investment in the country. Investor wants to have a quick result before it. But all the snags have been removed, all the delays have been overcome, and now it has become easier for the investor or for the businessman to process things easily. Whenever they face any problem, at least they can approach the authority at the highest level and get them solved.
Right. Mr. Bokhari, what's your understanding? This psychological barrier reached. We've seen Pakistan Stock Exchange posting such a bullish trend in the recent past. It's quite considerable gains being witnessed over there. Now, reaching this psychological barrier of 100,000 points, what primarily it indicates about the steps and the measures which have been put in by the government, especially when there was a fear of default, and the government, through strategizing in a holistic way, avoided the default also. But not only that, also putting the country's economy on the right trajectory, which is stabilized now. And this particular factor of Pakistan Stock Exchange, what does that indicate?
The outlook, Pakistan's economic outlook today is completely in contrast to about 18 months ago. Here I'm referring back to summer of 2023, before the stopgap IMF program of about $3 billion was signed. Back then, people were talking about an imminent default. Comparisons were being made to Sri Lanka, the last country in this region to go through a default. Generally, there was an air of pessimism all around. And the view back then was that Pakistan had become practically insolvent. So if you look at the picture, as I say, about 17, 18 months ago and where we've landed today, this is completely the opposite, because obviously there's a sense of optimism. But this is not the entire story. As the Prime Minister himself said today, that this ought to be Pakistan's last IMF program. And therefore, there are other steps that need to be taken. Fundamentally, the most important step right now, I think, is to revive economic growth, because as it stands today, it's marginally above Pakistan's population growth rate. So we need to build it up further, which means giving an impetus to growth in industry, the manufacturing sector. Agriculture is very important to especially to make food commodities more widely available and more affordable for ordinary low-income consumers. But I think in spite of those gaps, and you can't ignore them, I think the journey has begun. And this is important. This is very important. Pakistan has begun this journey. Now we have to stay on track, stay on this track, keep the overall outlook stable, avoid going back to where we were 17, 18 months ago, because that's not a place where any country
would like to be. So what exactly, I'll come to this particular point when the Prime Minister says that this particular IMF program would be the last one, and that is what the intention and the desire of the incumbent authorities here in Pakistan is. And all eyes are set on that particular resolve that the government has made, and hopefully so it would be achieved. But for that, the Prime Minister says we need to have a comprehensive plan, and a homegrown plan would be unveiled soon that would transform the economic landscape of the country. I'll come to that particular point, what exactly the major steps are required in that particular regard. So you already mentioned in your earlier take, taking a stock take of the the journey that was 17 and 18 months before. There was an imminent default that was a threat over there. What made the government, what were those steps that the government actually brought in that actually put the country's economy towards the path to stability?
There's no one step, but I think one of the more important steps was stabilizing the rupee. You remember the rupee at one time against the US dollar was touching 340 rupees, and from there it's come in a reverse direction. That's very important. Also, here in Islamabad, around banks, customers were lining up to withdraw their foreign currency, and the banks didn't have enough foreign currency to give out. Importers were complaining about their bills not getting settled. Various merchandise available for sale at retail stores, especially pharmaceuticals, for example. These items were either scarce or in short supply, and there was a general sense of near panic. People were worried about the future. I think the transition from that stage or that position to where we are today is a very important one that we cannot ignore. We have to give credit.
So during this whole time span, from that particular standby arrangement of $3 billion, that very temporary arrangement between the authorities in Pakistan and the IMF, and then getting this EFF of $7 billion, how significant those steps have been when it came to navigating through that corridor, while keeping in view the public demand at the same time, keeping in view that it's very important not to burden the common masses as well, at the same time keeping up with that particular pace as is required by the IMF through those tough conditions?
In the history of the world, here we are talking about the last almost 80 years since the Bretton Woods institutions were created, the World Bank, the IMF, the IFC, and so on. The IMF has come to be seen as the lender of last resort, and the countries that the IMF has dealt with during this time generally have had to go through painful adjustments. Pakistan is no exception to that pattern. Pakistan has had to go through a painful adjustment. Utility prices have been raised significantly by a larger margin than what we've seen ever before in our history. These are not insignificant steps. These are significant as well as painful. But Pakistan has gone through this journey. I think broadly and fundamentally, the stepping stone has been carefully put in place. Now the next part of the journey has to be executed successfully, and I think we should give credit to the authorities. The Prime Minister has spoken out about this today, that there is a constant reminder to Pakistanis that this must be the last IMF program. Once you remind the country and policymakers that that has to be the goal, then the next step is to make it happen. And I think the make it happen is now what we have to see. The Prime Minister has talked about a homegrown program that he's said will be unveiled in the near future. Of course, the biggest or one of the biggest challenges facing any government in Pakistan is reforming the tax collection system, the revenue system. These are not easy adjustments. There are segments of society which have been kept practically exempt from paying their taxes in the past, and now they're being roped into to the tax net. Not an easy adjustment, but one that Pakistan must embrace. for its own good.
And that remains to be one of the key conditions of the IMF as well. What needs to be done practically on that particular front? I'll come back to you for your detailed view regarding that. For now, we are honored to be joined by another participant, Mr. Shikoh Atif, a senior economist, joining us on the phone line. Mr. Atif, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. How do you look at this particular historic milestone achieved at the Pakistan Stock Exchange, crossing the psychological barrier of 100,000 points, and the Prime Minister has also congratulated the country? What primarily it is indicative of? We see the economic indicators show that foreign direct investment and the total foreign investment in the recent past has considerably increased owing to the measures put in place by the authorities here in Pakistan.
Of course. Well, my initial sentiment is, of course, of tremendous pride in our country and in ourselves. There is no market across the globe that has given 20% year-over-year returns over the past 25 years, and that has been the Pakistan Stock Exchange. The only downside is that about 500,000 people all across the country participate in it. However, for each and every one of us, common people, common men, the good news is that the stock exchange is actually a forward-looking indicator. It actually gives the news of better tomorrow. And you know that these people who bid the stock market up are no idiots. They don't just, and I know of people all across the globe who have invested in the market. So, it is a wonderful thing. It is a wonderful accomplishment. And the two things that you were just talking about, the two reasons for this, one has been the wonderful transition from a short-term IMF program to a long-term IMF program over the past 17, 18 months. I know we like to criticize ourselves a great deal, but IMF is very pleased with how we have transitioned from the short-term IMF program to the long-term IMF program. The other thing that we have really missed out, is the semblance of stability that the government, the environment has been stable over the past 18 months, and you've seen the results. So all Pakistan needs is a little bit of stability. We've got the talent to outshine anyone in the world.
Right. So if this particular trend continues at the Pakistan Stock Exchanges, so where do you foresee it going, for example, in 5 to 10 years from now?
Yes. So the size of the Pakistan Stock Exchange used to be 30 to 40% of the economy. Unfortunately, it has come down to about 10 to 15% of the economy. And so the trend that I see with this landmark being crossed is over the next 5 to 10 years, our size doubling to about 30 to 40%. Even more so because, the real estate sector is not booming as much as possible. And, it is programs like this and others that actually bring this stock exchange, stock markets. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand it, and that's the reason they don't invest in it. However, if I may say, and I don't have any business related to that, mutual funds is where the common person needs to invest, which is a combination of all the investments. Just so that for any viewers of yours that are sort of intimidated by what goes on in the stock exchange. So 20% year-over-year returns. There is no other sector that is delivering that right now in Pakistan or even in the region.
Two primary factors that you have already mentioned, Mr. Atif. Now, that particular transition from the standby arrangement to a longer extended fund facility loan program. Now, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is of the view to make it the last IMF program, we have to have implementation of a comprehensive plan. The government is going to unveil soon a homegrown plan that will transform the country's economic landscape. Are there any suggestions on your part in order to, suggest to the authorities what could be the possible contours of that homegrown plan that could transform the country's landscape, and the Pakistani nation might not have to go for another IMF program in the future?
Well, it has to be homegrown. Fortunately, right now, the international environment is conducive to Pakistan. The oil prices are down, and that has really contributed to inflation being down as well. I know there is a lot of, I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but this messaging that has come through the stock exchange is this. Very, very soon, interest rates are going to be lower and salaries and wages are going to be higher. So you're going to have like a 10 to 15% increase in your wages and inflation. Even now, the price of bread has come down. The price of roti is the same as it was last year. So lots of good things happening. What I would suggest is, as one of your previous participants who sort of was touching upon, all the efforts towards taxation, and all of us have to come into the fold. What has happened, the panic that sort of garnered over the past couple of years, not only in Pakistan, but in India and across all the developing world, and people rushing to the developed countries, US, Canada, China, not China, but European countries, that is also a tremendous boost to Pakistan. All the remittances coming back in all through the proper channels. My plea again would be for those remittances to be invested. I know Pakistan government is offering tremendous programs for overseas investments. As our agriculture sector and as our real estate sector come into the taxation fold, I think the economy is going to, because we are primarily an agricultural country, I think.
Mr. Shikoh Atif, senior economist, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Jaleel, if this particular trend continues at the Pakistan Stock Exchange, where do you see it heading in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think that the government, if these trends they continue to prevail, inshallah ta'ala, within the next 5 years and the 10 years, we will be able to achieve our aspiring ends, which the government have fixed under this new economic arrangement as well. But what I would like to say, when Prime Minister says that this should be and this could be the last IMF bailout program, and I think so, it should. It's a heartening news, and but in this respect, we will have to adopt a very sound, robust policy as well, based upon the export-oriented growth policy, which could earn the foreign exchange for us. And in this respect, we need to have a very strong presence in international market. We have to explore international, create new networking as well, and we have to raise the quality of our exportable product as well. In this respect, I would say the monetary policy would need some kind of an adjustment. Right now, the investment, interest, the rate, I would say that they are pretty too high. And they would be, and I hope in days to come the government will be able to rationalize it so that the industrial sector, which is in the budding stage, they need capital and they can have an easy access to it, number one. And number two, energy. Pakistani, the negative factor with our national economy was the high cost of the energy, and we have got a debt reliance on the imported energy products, especially petroleum and etc. Now the world is moving towards green technology. Reliance on petrol is coming down. This is the time that we should take benefit out of it, number one. We should explore our own, definitely the government is committed, we should explore our own energy resources as well on a idle basis. Idle basis carries a greater prospect. At a much cheaper rate, we can make energy available to it. It would bring down the cost of the production, which is now definitely creates a lot of liability for the manufacturers as well. Right. Number two and number three is that 22% of the GDP is contributed by our agriculture sector, and the world, I can see the world, the future of the society, especially economic development, future of the society is deeply linked with the food security system as well. That's very important. There are countries which are still, have a very, they have got abysmal dependence on their imported food items. Even Chinese have to import a huge food every year. And they have made some program, and they wanted to have a collaboration with the Pakistani government as well. Government have taken some step of mechanized farming. I think, and hopefully we will be able to produce a good surplus which could which would definitely be made available in the international market through our policy.
So increasing the agricultural productivity, bringing in new techniques and procedures.
Yeah, yes.
Mechanization. Now, what about how you already mentioned the 22% of the GDP of agriculture? So how to get the maximum, the tax revenue out of it? How to incorporate that very innovation in agriculture and linking it directly to getting the maximum revenue out of it?
Yes, you know, this is a very, very important question. Because I myself had served in the income tax department for a pretty long year, so I've got some experience. When you talk to the farmer that we would like to have, we do not have a big farmland here. A big farm holding community is very limited. And I do, you know, prescribe to the idea of bringing agriculture sector under taxation as well. But in this respect, the business community, the farming community has got their own demand as well. Number one, they say that if you tax us, you must treat us equal to industrial sector and provide us those benefits as well. For example, crop insurance. The government should think about it. That if our crop is failed, then certainly we will not be able to meet the government liability. Then you should provide us a cover as well. So this is what the government has to. The government have to balance it, this agriculture taxation policy with certain new measures, which meets the expectation of the farmer as well. The farmer wants to have a more straight pattern right. For example, number one, at concessional rate, electricity should be supplied to them. At concessional rate, they should be supplied. If the government wants to impose, you know, the tariff or the price structure upon them, then they should be provided at a concessional rate fertilizer. Then apart from then accessibility to the market. Right now, they are facing a lot of exploitation at the hand of the middleman as well. This middleman role should be minimized, and the warehousing facility, preservation facility, especially after
where does that disadvantage lies when it comes to the role of middleman?
Middleman, because our farmer is too poor to, you know, to preserve its surplus there. So they are totally depending upon the middleman who have got lot of resources. They can buy them at a cheap rate, and they have the facility for their preservation in big cities as well. So this is the government of, you know, in 2003-4, with the help of IMF and the World Bank, the government have produced certain PRSP paper, you know, strategy paper, poverty reduction strategy paper. Right. Then it was decided that the farmer will be provided, they will be provided these very sharp connectivity with the international market and with the domestic market as well. There are still many linkages which are missing, which needs to bridge them up, right? And we hope, and then the government have also taken a good step in this respect, short-sizing at the government structure, the government machinery as well, for the sake of economy, number one, and number two, the state enterprises, their liability, and the government have to pay a lot of subsidy to PIA, to steel mill and etc. And IMF was very unhappy about it, certainly unhappy, and IMF, as part of their export, as part of their bailout program, it is conditional for the government of, I mean, it is one of the conditions levied upon the government of Pakistan that you have to go for that privatization of these, these state enterprises which has piled up your liability.
Right. So, Mr. Bokhari, talking specifically about broadening the tax base, one of the key conditions of the IMF, agriculture, every now and then we have the discussion. All the analysts and the people, the economists, are of the view that it's got a huge potential. Primarily, it remains to be a provincial issue. Firstly, what are the expectations as far as the farmers' community is concerned? How the government or the authorities could go and facilitate keeping in view all those expectations of the farmers' community? And what's the potential overall, how to get the maximum revenue as a dividend out of this particular sector?
I think there's a very major need to rethink fundamentally rethink some of our policies in the agriculture sector. Very broadly, right now, the situation is that the government, both federal and the provincial governments in particular, use different tools to, I wouldn't like to use the word control, but hold off on the prices of certain commodities because their sudden spectacular rise would be very sensitive. Case of wheat, for example, in particular. So there is this mechanism, some of those mechanisms are formal, others are informal, to not allow the prices of certain commodities to rise above a certain level. But on the other hand, the government has also been withdrawing its support to the agriculture sector. In the past, there were support prices which are now practically gone. This year, we saw the practical end of the support price for wheat. So there's a kind of a very difficult contradictory method in place, and I think as a country we need to decide if we want to move the agriculture sector towards a free market mechanism, then farmers should be getting returns accordingly, no matter how sensitive the issue, but it doesn't make any economic sense because you can't hold off on both sides of the coin. Once you've done that, then you have to come up with the next question, which is the way that taxation would be applied, tax would be collected, because this is also not an easy matter. Over time, we've seen repeatedly that out in the rural areas, a mechanism, working effective mechanism to collect these taxes, or a more modern progressive income tax on agriculture is virtually non-existent. So the question is, how would the authorities proceed in this? But by and large, agriculture is the one sector where you can revive economic growth in Pakistan in less than a year. A couple of bumper crops and the lie of the land will begin to transform. It will be a different story
Just
altogether.
a couple of bumper crops, or
Well,
there should be a
to
trend of sustainability?
Yes, if you have a few bumper crops, the big crops, turning into bumper in any given year, we would not only have a more salutary effect for domestic prices of those commodities. Wheat is Pakistan's main staple diet, but also there are other crops like rice, like sugarcane, like cotton. Sugarcane has other issues it consumes, and so does rice. These crops consume too much water, and Pakistan is increasingly becoming a water scarce country. But if you can have a few bumper crops in the short term within a year, then you see a revival of agriculture. And in addition to crops, livestock is very central to the performance of agriculture in Pakistan. So you have to have a productivity increase, and then you should move fundamentally in a new manner on creating a mechanism, because it's really about a mechanism. You need to create a mechanism to be able to collect a more modern income tax. In the past, traditionally, historically, we've seen revenue collection from agriculture coming through patwaris. But that system, I think, has outlived its utility, and you'll have to come up with some new mechanism which is fair and more modern, that begins to tackle this long overdue problem which has not been solved over time.
Mr. Bokhari, could you provide us an understanding regarding as to this particular sector remaining to be one of the key sectors or in focus sectors under the umbrella of the Special Investment Facilitation Council, how that potential under this particular initiative could be tapped from this in order to enhance the agricultural productivity in particular?
We are all aware that less than half of our population, and some say it's 40%, others quote a higher figure, but it's a significant chunk of the population, is directly or indirectly tied to agriculture. Their incomes are tied to agriculture. That's a very large segment of Pakistan's population. Here we're talking about maybe up to 100 million people. That's a very large chunk of the population. Now imagine this scenario. If there's more money in their pockets, then they have more prosperity. So at the grassroots, you begin to create a prosperity effect. Meanwhile, you asked about SIFC, which is a somewhat different model. And the potential is huge. Years ago, on one of my visits to Australia, someone, one of the people who hosted me said that he was quite taken aback by Pakistan's condition, Pakistan's story, because from Australia they were exporting sacrificial lambs to Saudi Arabia to be slaughtered during Hajj, which is an obligation. Every Haji has to slaughter one lamb. And here we are as a country much closer to Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and we could not tap into this market. Now just imagine if Pakistan goes through, on the one hand, investments coming in through SIFC and pouring into large
By the way,
new
the livestock
farmland.
is also associated with the agriculture under the umbrella of SIFC.
Absolutely. And then as a result of that, the overall condition of livestock in Pakistan getting lifted, animals for meat, and then Pakistan getting into a situation where we can tap into the Saudi Arabian Hajj market. This is just one example, but I think it shines a light on a broader prospect, a broader opportunity, which is waiting to be tapped. There are communities along our coastline, for example, and we do have fish coming from the coastline of Karachi right up to stretching right up to Balochistan. But we also have imported fish. Now sometimes I go into the market to buy fish for our home, and I ask myself a question, why can't Pakistan or Pakistanis expand their fisheries so robustly, especially in the southern parts of Pakistan, that we are not only self-sufficient, but we increase our exports. In the north, we have very high quality trout. Now, does trout get exported from Pakistan? Have we done enough to increase our trout farming? These are examples which beg multiple questions on what is it that is required for Pakistan to make the transition, make the change for the better.
Point well taken. Mr. Jaleel, you already talked about that particular initiative under the SIFC of overcoming all those bureaucratic hurdles by the provision of one window operation. So in terms of foreign direct investment, we know that the SIFC basically focuses on attracting the foreign direct investment in 5 key areas, from agriculture to IT, mines and minerals. Now, when we specifically talk about overcoming those bureaucratic hurdles, for the local investors, what's required for that? Could that same model under the SIFC be applied for the local investors as well?
There are many models available in the world. For example, if you try to study the Chinese model, or even the model which prevails in Arab country, in Gulf region, Qatar, UAE, even Saudi Arabia, they have produced a very good model that brings about a quick investment implementation of the policy. And it was against the Pakistan, in fact, have suffered because of the bureaucratic hurdle. Our structure is highly bureaucratized and centralized. It requires, you have to go through a very lengthy procedure to get final approval for the project. So the one window operation has to be made very effective. Though the government have introduced it, FIFC have taken some measure in this respect. And given the situation, they have provided direct access to the big investor, to the authority which has to take measure, and they are given priority. their name is placed on the list of the priority. So this has proved some kind of a dividend. It has restored faith of the investor in people as well. So this is one factor which, you know, promote the interest of the investor, and they would rather much like to make investment here. Even the Pakistani, expatriate Pakistani, who are quite rich, and they enjoy the status of a big capitalist, even Western country, even the Gulf region would like to come back and make their investment here, number one. Number two is this apart from this the tax, you know, the taxation system have to be rationalized. Taxation system, I strongly believe that those investors who have launched some projects, especially in high tech or in a high tech area, they have to be provided tax holiday or the tax shelter status for some time, at least for 3, 4, 5 years. The government have taken some step, and they have declared some area as a tax holiday area, which are far-flung area. But this extension, this exemption should be expanded to include high-tech sector, even if they are operating in the big cities as well. This is very important, because Pakistan has, good or for good reason or whatever the reason were, but we have lagged behind in this race of industrialization. Then Pakistan has made a good marks in the software development industry as well, and we need to expand this sector. Certain more incentives are needed. We have produced over the last 1 or 2 decades quite a big number of the software expertise, ITs and other expertise in digital sciences as well. I think the government have to commit more resources in this area, and we, the whole, as you know, the whole world is now, all the big countries, China, America, Russia, India, etc., all big countries now, they are in a mad race and pursuing a very ambitious agenda under artificial intelligence area. These components of the digital sciences have gained the future belongs to these aspect of the digital sciences, and we have to earmark this area specifically on a priority basis. That is, and it needs more investment as well. Especially not in investment only on development of infrastructure, but on educational infrastructure as well.
Point well taken. Unfortunately, we're short of time. A quick last comment regarding as to Prime Minister's statement at the National Security Workshop today, as the national security has a direct linkage with the economic security. How do you look at that, Mr. Bokhari?
Obvious point, one that goes without saying. Countries which, heaven forbid, go through an economic collapse, then end up in situations where they fail to defend their interests across the board, including security interests. Years ago, Yale historian Paul Kennedy in the 80s came out with a book, and I would recommend that to everyone, The Rise and Fall of Great Powers. He tracked the history of great powers overexpanding, overstretching themselves militarily, but not being able to cope economically with their commitments or responsibilities or whatever you may want to call it. And ultimately, the failure to keep up the economic muscle with their commitments led to a dismal failure all round, the rise and fall of great powers, hence being the title. And I think that's the lesson that we have to keep on reminding ourselves of. After all, Pakistan is the Islamic world's only country armed with nuclear weapons, a source of pride for us. We became nuclearized 26 years ago. We live in a tough neighborhood. We have major challenges internally on our borders, maritime security. The question is, can we keep on meeting these challenges unless we go through a very vigorous economic revival? And that's why this is reviving the economy is so very central to the future of Pakistan.
Mr. Farhan Bokhari, senior journalist, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Mr. Abdul Jaleel, senior economist, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.